Welcome to the Wise Idea Weekly Podcast with Christopher J. Harris, focusing on life, leadership, family, marriage, and the church. We are providing tools for our inspiration and wisdom for life. Our goal is to inspire everyday people to live wise lives. If you're new to us, we release a brand new podcast weekly on Thursdays. Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode. Here's our host, Christopher J. Harris.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome again to another episode of the Wise Idea Weekly Podcast with Christopher J. Harris. I am your host, and I want to welcome you to the podcast. I'm extremely honored that you have taken the time out to hang out with us this week. And for those of you that are back with us, thank you so much for being back with us. We are focused and on mission to provide strategies for hearts to be inspired and for heads to become wise. It is our goal to inspire everyday people to live wise lives. Personally, I am passionate about life, leadership, family and marriage, and ministry. That is the church. And so that's what the focus of this podcast is. John Maynard Keynes was quoted as saying, "Ideas shape the course of history." I would like to edit that just a little bit. Wise ideas positively change the course of lives. Make no mistake about it, and I say it all the time, when wisdom becomes a part of your life, your entire life gets better in every single area. Again, for those of you that are joining us for the first time, thank you so much. We release a brand new podcast every single Thursday. And a lot of you may listen to this podcast with friends or in groups, and I'd love to hear about those groups. I'd love to hear about your listening parties. And so feel free to send us an email at info at thewise-idea-podcast.com. Thank you so much to all of you that have been sharing the podcast, sharing the tools, the information. I've heard back, and I hear back from so many of you all on a regular basis. And I don't take it for granted, nor do I take it lightly. Well, guess what, y'all? We are now gearing up for back to school. It is back to school time. And so today's episode, along with the next few weeks of episodes, will be focused on back to school. This is our back to school series. And I'm excited because we're going to talk about everything from generational differences and knowing Generation Z, Generation Y, millennials, the boomers, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to talk through all of that. We're going to talk about what it means to get organized in your home. We're going to have some principals and school system administrators that will be on the podcast with us, and they're going to give us an educator's perspective on what that looks like with back to school and the school year and parenting and just all the dynamics that are going on at play in our culture today. We're going to talk about it from a parenting standpoint. And today, we just want to kind of kick the conversation off. There is, trust me, you want to listen all the way through the end of this episode today, because there's going to be an action step that you're not going to want to miss. But I want to ask you a question. What does back to school mean to you? What does back to school mean to you? For many people, it means new rhythms and new schedules, new people, new relationships being formed, new introductions taking place. For the kids, there are lots of emotions. There's lots of emotions for the parents even, for teachers even. It can be stressful. There are moments where there's excitement. There's this anticipation of what's going to happen this year. There's, of course, the unknown. So there's a wide range of emotions that comes when we start talking about back to school. There are new goals that we have to think about and talk through and embrace. There are new expenses, of course, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. But school shopping, of course, is a part of back to school. There's doctor's appointments. Oh, my goodness. As a dad, I got to tell you that sometimes that can be overwhelming, just trying to keep track of all of the paperwork and the physicals and the immunizations and the verifications and the screenings. And then if you've got children that are involved in after school activities, then you've got that reality as well to get them prepared for all of those dynamics. So back to school can mean a whole lot of things to a whole lot of people. I just alluded to this, but when we start talking about back to school shopping, oh yeah, many states now have the tax-free weekends. And some of you may be in the midst of that right now. And some of you may have already experienced that. And some of you, it may be coming up pretty soon. Let's look at some of these numbers here. Let's listen to some of these numbers of back to school shopping by the numbers. According to Deloitte, in a survey that they produced, there is $27.8 billion in the United States in spending for back to school shopping. $519 is the dollar amount that is given to the average back to school spending per child. And that's broken down by this. That $27.8 billion in spending is broken down this way. $15 billion in clothing and accessories. $6.1 billion in school supplies. $3.6 billion in electronic gadgets. $3.1 billion in computers and hardware. That's a whole lot of money. As you can tell, back to school is serious business. Even people who don't have school-aged children are impacted by back to school. They will acknowledge that there is a change in the traffic patterns. There's a change in when the gym is busy. There's a change in when stores are busy. There's a change in waiting at restaurants. The whole dynamic. Everyone is impacted by back to school. We also have to acknowledge that we have some very real challenges facing our children today. School safety is a top concern for many people. It looks radically different today in our schools than it did just 5 years ago. Technology and social media are a reality that is different today. Testing and academic levels and being on academic rigor and thinking through those dynamics are a different reality that we've got to think through and embrace. And then thinking long term, funding college and future college plans is something that is on the minds of parents and families and guardians as they prepare for their children's futures. Of course, I mentioned a little bit earlier, but extracurricular activities are also on these spinning plates and these balls that we are trying to juggle. Many of us would acknowledge that we are busier now than we've ever been before. In a 2017 survey by Barna Research Group, nearly 8 out of 10 parents indicated that they thought parenting was more difficult for them than it was for their parents. What do you think about that? Is parenting more difficult today than it was for your parents? There can be a whole discussion on that, and we may circle back to that some other time. But that just gives you some food for thought to think through. Do you think parenting is different than it was before? Is it more difficult? Is it less difficult? When asked what factors make it more difficult, in this Barna research study that was done in 2017, 65% said technology and social media has made it more difficult. 52% said the world is more dangerous, and 40% pointed to a lack of common morality. Here is where we kind of turn the corner a little bit. I want to challenge you that whether you think it is more difficult or not, whether you believe that it is less difficult or not, regardless of the factors that you believe, if you believe that it's more difficult, regardless of those factors that have made it more difficult, you as the parent, you as the adult have a major influence into the lives of your children and our children. And so a part of what I want to ask you today then is this. What is your intentional game plan to raise your children and your game plan to be a parent? The truth of the matter is that all of us would agree that time flies. Oh my goodness. I remember bringing my high school student home from the hospital. Here I am now, and she just growing by leaps and bounds. And we all acknowledge that when you just blink, that time just flies. I love this book. It's a book called It's a Phase, and it was done by the Orange Curriculum. And they said this: a parent will have, think about this, 936 weeks between a child's birth and that same child's graduation. 936 weeks between a child's birth and that same child's graduation. I got to tell you, that's sobering. I got to tell you that is somewhat paralyzing. It is sobering because it lets you know how quickly time flies, and that we don't want to miss phases, and we don't want to miss transitions, and we don't want to miss moments. When you think about this, though, it is even more humbling to know that there is no solid owner's manual for parenting. There is no solid owner's manual for parenting. So if we're going to come up with an intentional game plan, we've got to be intentional about how we do that. We've got to be introspective on how we do that. And we've got to acknowledge that it's not easy being a parent, that it is complex. It is layered. It is not a simple just check off the boxes. We've got to learn how to investigate the unique personalities of our children. We've got to learn how to think through their levels of identity. That is their emotional identity. And the questions that they are asking under this bucket about emotional identity is, am I loved? Am I cared for? Am I valued? We've got to think through their sexual identity. Who am I? And what does that mean? What is my gender? And how do I navigate that in a godly, God-fearing way? We've got to think through their spiritual identity. Who is God? Does God love me? Who am I spiritually? What is God's plan for me? Not just does God have a plan for me, but once I resolve that he does, what is that plan that he has for me? Their mental identity. That is where they determine and muster up enough fortitude to say and to answer the question, do I have the ability and the capacity to succeed in what God is called and wired me to do? Make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, there is no such thing as a perfect parent. There is no such thing as a perfect child. But we do intentionally need to have an intentional game plan. So if I understand that there's no owner's manual and that it's not easy and that there's no perfect parent and no perfect children, then what is the best way for me to pursue and embrace this notion of developing an intentional game plan for my children? Well, I become more knowledgeable as I investigate their personalities. Watch this, that I do what Stephen Covey said in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Habit number 2, I've got to begin with the end in mind. I've got to begin with the end in mind. The question then that is before us is, what do we want our kids to become? What do we want our kids to become? When you think about that, 936 weeks between a child's birth and that same child's graduation, what do you want your child to walk out of the door with when they leave your home? Stephen Covey says that before you can live a good, meaningful life or even give that life to someone else, you've got to know what that looks like. When we know how we want people to talk about us at the end of our life, Covey says, we can start taking action now to make that scenario a reality later. With the end in mind, we'll know what we need to do from a day-to-day and a week-to-week standpoint to even get there. I love this because David Brooks, a writer who wrote the book, The Road to Character, he talks about the difference between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. I love this. Watch what he says. He says, the resume virtues are the ones you list on your resume, the skills that bring you, that you bring to the job market and that contribute to your external success. The eulogy virtues, however, are deeper. They are the virtues that get talked about at your funeral, the ones that exist at the core of your being, whether you are kind or brave, honest or faithful, what kind of relationships you formed, which speaks to, again, your character. Brooks goes on to say, our education system is certainly orientated around the resume virtues more than the eulogy virtues. He says public conversation is, too, the self-help tips in magazines and the nonfiction bestsellers. Most of us, he says, have clearer strategies for how to achieve career success than we do for how to develop a profound character. And so I want to challenge you to develop, here it is, a big vision for your children. Now, I know that I have lots and lots of people who listen to this podcast who are not, have not necessarily subscribed to the Bible. You know that I am a subscriber and a embracer of the notion of scripture and God and faith. And so bear with me just for a moment, because I believe that this worldview that I have shapes how I approach this notion of developing a big vision for our children. As an adult, as a parent, as a leader in the community, I have to first acknowledge that our children are a reward and a blessing from God. Now, you think about that. You think about the dirty diapers. You think about all the disciplinary issues. You think about the fussing. You think about cleaning up. You think about all of the challenges sometimes that as parents we have in our home with our children. We have to remember, though, that in the midst of some of those challenges, we have to remember, according to the book of Psalm, and that's Psalm 127, verses 3 through 5, that our children are a blessing from God. Number two, I have to acknowledge that they are made in the image of God. That notion of being made in the image of God, we understand that from an adult standpoint, but we often don't embrace that when it comes to our children. We have to also acknowledge that our children are made in the image of God. We also have to acknowledge that God made them in his image with a purpose, and that purpose has a promise on it. And that reality of them having a purpose and a promise moves us to the place of understanding, please hear this, that there is no future without our children involved. They are our nation's greatest resource. They are our legacy. They are our disciple makers for tomorrow. They are our influencers, our game changers, our business leaders. They are our creatives. They are our policymakers. And we're developing the character and the integrity and a big vision for them now of what they will become later. I love this poem by Dr. Dorothy Law Nolte. Children learn what they live. It's a very common poem. She says, if children live with criticism, they learn to condemn. If children live with hostility, they learn to fight. If children live with fear, they learn to be apprehensive. If children live with pity, they learn to feel sorry for themselves. If children live with ridicule, they learn to feel shy. If children live with jealousy, they learn to feel envy. If they live with shame, they learn to feel guilty. If they live with encouragement, they learn confidence. If they live with tolerance, they learn patience. If they live with praise, they learn appreciation. If they live with acceptance, they learn to love. If they live with approval, they learn to like themselves. If they live with recognition, they learn it is good to have a goal. If children live with sharing, they learn generosity. With honesty, they learn truthfulness. With fairness, they learn justice. If they live with kindness and consideration, they learn respect. If children live with security, they learn to have faith in themselves and those about them. If children live with friendliness, they learn the world is a nice place in which to live. I will put that poem in our show notes. And so I want to challenge you as you develop this big vision for children. Become educated, become aware, become a student, not just of your child, but children in general. In the book, It's Just a Phase, the Orange Curriculum gives us this template of what to think about in these various phases of our child's life. From birth up to age 4. From birth up to age 4. The child thinks like an artist, they say. And they are answering the question, am I safe? Am I able? And am I okay? They are motivated by safety. And in this phase, it is important for us to embrace their physical needs, to teach them to know God's love and to meet God's family. So we want to help them to embrace their physical needs. In the next phase, that is from kindergarten through the 5th grade, the child is thinking like a scientist. It is at this point where they have their first day of school and they are growing. Do I have your attention is a question that they are asking. Do I have what it takes is a question that they are asking. Do I have friends is a question that they are asking. Watch what they're motivated by. They are motivated by fun. They are motivated by fun. It is in this phase that it is important for us to engage their interest, and while we engage their interest, to teach them how to trust the character of God and to experience God's family. In the next phase, that is from grade 6 through grade 8. In many cases, this is called middle school. It is in this phase that they are thinking like an engineer, where they are coming of age and their identity is really being shaped and formed. That is, who do I like and who am I? Who do I like and who am I? They are motivated in this phase by acceptance. It is in this phase as the adults that we want to affirm their personal journey, and that is to teach them to own their own faith and to value a faith community. In the last phase, before graduation, from grades 9 through 12 or up to age 18, they are now thinking like philosophers. It is here in this phase where their freedom is starting to blossom and come to bear. It is in this phase that they're thinking about moving on, and graduation is on the horizon. It is in this phase where they're asking these questions: where do I belong? Why should I believe? How can I matter? And what will I do? They are motivated by freedom. And it is in this phase as the adults that we should help mobilize their potential. We also want to help to keep them pursuing an authentic faith and to discover their personal mission in life. So here is your homework assignment. Here is something that you want to start doing. I want to issue this one challenge to you for this entire episode. What are the things that you want your kids to know when they leave your home? What are the things that you want your kids to know when they leave your home? Just start making a list. That's your homework assignment, to start making a list. I started this in preparation for this episode. I started making a list. Now, here is how you can make this a little simple and be able to kind of cover everything that you may need to cover. So here are some categories for you to be able to navigate as you make this list. Okay, here's some categories. All right, number one, the category is spiritual. The category is spiritual. Number two, the emotional. Number three, the physical. Number four, the mental. Number five, the practical. Number six, the social. And number seven, other. Again, let me give them to you again. Spiritual, emotional, physical, mental, practical, social, and other. We're going to pick up with this discussion next week. Next week, we're going to have some guests on that will tell us more about this notion of being in back to school mode. I'm excited about the conversation. Our announcer is going to come and share some more details with you of how you can further connect with us and how you can follow up with us. Come on, y'all. Let's jump in on this journey together, and let's have some incredible conversations about what it looks like to make adults while we are raising our children. Thank you so much for being on. I look forward to having you tune in with us next week. You know how I end every single broadcast. Live wisely.
Thanks again for joining us on another episode of the Wise Idea Podcast with Christopher J. Harris. We hope you enjoyed our time together. If you did and would like additional resources and information, you can find the previous episodes, show notes, featured guest information, and more at www.thewiseideapodcast.com. We also invite you to join the conversation on social media. The Wise Idea Podcast is on Twitter and Facebook. Find us at The Wise Idea and at our Facebook group, The Wise Idea Podcast. On Instagram, find us at The Wise Idea Podcast. Our host is also on social media. You can find him regularly on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Pinterest, all located at CJ Harris 1. Finally, if you enjoyed what you've heard, head over to iTunes and or Google Play and leave a rating and review for other listeners to find us. Our podcast is also on Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Thanks again for joining us. We will see you the next time. Live wisely.
sing.